In this video, I'm going to show you an in-depth comparison between the GoPro Fusion and the Insta360 ONE X as of 2019. I'm also going to talk about the next Insta360 ONE X. I'm going to give you my predictions about when it's going to come out and what features can we expect from it. So to compare image quality, we're going to use the 360 camera buying guide on 360rumors.com, or you can also go to 360cameracomparison.com. So here we're going to compare video quality over here, so we can compare two cameras side by side. I'm going to zoom in, make it easier to see. So on the left side, let's select GoPro Fusion 5.6K, and on the right side, let's compare it to the Insta360 ONE X at 5.7K. Let's first try non-HDR. So to zoom, we're going to zoom in. I'm going to maximize this, zoom in, and then let's focus on this basketball area, which has a net around it. And here we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to expand this, and I'm going to zoom in. So they both have the same zoom in view. Now let's compare the detail. On the left side, you see the GoPro Fusion, and the net around the basketball court is barely visible. It's almost like in this part, for example, you can't see anything. You can kind of see it here. Whereas with the Insta360 ONE X, you can clearly see the net. It's right here, here. So this shows that the Insta360 ONE X has more detail than the GoPro Fusion, even at the 5.6K mode of the Fusion. On the other hand, the Fusion appears to have better dynamic range. So here, for example, the background is less blown out. You can see a little bit more detail here in the background. But the Insta360 ONE X has another mode called the HDR video mode. So let's try it out. So this is the HDR video mode, and this is not just like a tweaking of the tone curve or anything like that. This is an actual double exposure where you're getting the highlights at the different exposure from the rest of the video. The HDR video mode of the Insta360 ONE X, you can see that it has vastly greater dynamic range than the GoPro Fusion. As for detail, there's a little bit of loss of detail in the HDR video mode, but you can see that it still has comparable detail, if not more detail than the GoPro Fusion. So there's no disadvantage over the Fusion. So here you can see the detail here is more visible than in the Fusion. Same here with the shadows, likewise. So in other words, the Insta360 ONE X has better detail in the non-HDR mode and better dynamic range in the HDR mode. Now please note the HDR mode is not always usable. There are some situations where you cannot use HDR mode, and if you want to know more about that, then check out this video. So besides detail and dynamic range, let's talk about the other factors for image quality. So first, I'm going to tell you the GoPro Fusion's advantages for image quality. Then we'll talk about the Insta360 ONE X's other advantages for image quality. So the GoPro Fusion has 5 advantages for image quality. First of all is stitching. So the GoPro Fusion can stitch at a closer distance than the Insta360 ONE X, as low as 1 foot away, whereas the Insta360 ONE X stitches up to around 3 or 4 feet away. Next is flare resistance. The GoPro Fusion has much better flare resistance than the ONE X. The ONE X also has a red dot flare issue. When the sun is striking from the side, there's going to be a little red dot that's flying around. The Fusion also has lower compression. So this is visible, for example, when you're looking at the blue sky, and with the Fusion, you'll see a little bit less banding than the Insta360 ONE X. The Fusion also has a more appealing contrast straight out of the camera. So if you're not planning to edit your video, then the Fusion can look more appealing than the Insta360 ONE X. Finally, the Fusion has better audio. It has spatial audio that works really well, whereas the Insta360 ONE X's audio is limited to stereo. Now let's talk about the Insta360 ONE X. We already saw that it has better detail and dynamic range, but in addition, it also has 5 advantages over the GoPro Fusion. Number 1 is stabilization. The Insta360 ONE X has better stabilization than the GoPro Fusion. First of all, the Fusion has a little bit of drifting, and secondly, the Insta360 ONE X has better forward-facing stabilization. Next is low light performance. The ONE X has better low light performance than the GoPro Fusion. There's less noise and there's better contrast. Next is underwater photos and videos. The Insta360 ONE X can stitch smoothly underwater thanks to a special dive case. The GoPro Fusion is waterproof, but when you shoot underwater, the photos and videos are going to be blurred. Plus, it's not going to stitch smoothly. There's going to be a blind spot on the side when you're shooting underwater because it's not designed to shoot underwater. The ONE X also has manual exposure for both photos and videos, something that the Fusion doesn't have. And finally, the Insta360 ONE X has HDR photos. It can automatically take a 3-shot exposure bracket, and you can choose the exposure interval. Now let's talk about practicality and convenience. First, I'm going to tell you about the Fusion's advantages for convenience. Then we're going to talk about the Insta360 ONE X's advantages over the Fusion for convenience. The Fusion has 5 advantages over the ONE X for convenience. So first, the GoPro Fusion is waterproof, even without a case. So you don't have to worry about leaving your case behind or a case leaking. You'll be able to use the GoPro Fusion in wet environments. Next is battery life. The GoPro Fusion has a longer lasting battery. It can last up to like an hour and a half or even an hour and 45 minutes. Next is long duration recording. So the GoPro Fusion can record for like an hour and a half or hour 45 minutes straight without stopping. Whereas with the Insta360 ONE X, you're limited to 30 minutes, and then after that it has to write to the cache, so there's gonna be like a 10-second gap before it can continue recording. Another advantage of the Fusion is the date and time. See, with the ONE X, if you remove the battery, it resets the clock to around, I think, December 31, 2017 or something like that. Whereas with the Fusion, the date and time remains accurate, even if you remove the battery. Finally, the GoPro Fusion has voice command, which can sometimes act like a remote control, and it's convenient when both hands are occupied. The Insta360 ONE X, on the other hand, has 10 advantages for convenience over the GoPro Fusion. First is the mobile workflow. The Insta360 ONE X's mobile app is way better than the GoPro Fusion. It's a lot easier to edit and share both 360 photos and 360 videos or overcapture videos. Speaking of overcaptures, that's the next advantage of the Insta360 ONE X. It's a lot easier to create overcapture videos, both on your phone or desktop. By the way, if you're not familiar with overcapture, what it means is that you're shooting in 360, but you're presenting it as a non-360 video. And why would you want to do that? Well, you'll be able to control the perspective, and you'll be able to keyframe camera movements as if you had a cameraman following you around. Next is the no-stitch workflow. The Insta360 ONE X has an exclusive feature that lets you use Adobe Premiere to edit your 360 photos and videos even without stitching them. This is not only faster, but it's also going to result in higher quality because you're going to skip one level of compression. Next is hyperlapse and time shift. The Insta360 ONE X can do a hyperlapse, and not only that, it can do a speed ramp effect that they call time shift. So from a hyperlapse, it can go switch to slow motion and back, and it can add motion blur. It looks really cool. Another advantage of the ONE X is the self-timer. So the Insta360 ONE X has a self-timer that you can use even without connecting your camera to your phone. Next is the export format. The Insta360 ONE X renders its videos in H.264 format, which is more universally supported among video editors, including consumer-grade 360 video editors. Fusion, on the other hand, uses Cineform and ProRes. You have less compression, but most consumer-grade software can't really edit in Cineform or ProRes. Another advantage of the Insta360 ONE X is Insta360 Stats. This is a GPS overlay feature. So you'll be able to see, for example, your speed, your altitude, your compass direction, and you can even draw a GPS map. The ONE X is also better for rugged environments because it has an optional venture case. So the venture case protects the Insta360 ONE X, but unlike third-party cases, it has better stitching and better flare resistance. And when it comes to photos, the ONE X is also ahead of the Fusion in two ways. Number one is the RAW workflow. Both the Fusion and the ONE X support RAW, but Insta360 ONE X has a much easier RAW workflow. The Fusion's RAW workflow is a little bit tedious. Finally, ONE X has Matterport compatibility, so you can create 3D virtual tours where you can like fly through the virtual tour. It looks really cool. And if you want a more detailed comparison, then check out this video where I compared the Insta360 ONE X and the GoPro Fusion in 40 different ways. Alright, let's talk about the next version of the Insta360 ONE X. First, when is it likely to come out? Well, every year for the past several years, Insta360 has always released a new camera around fall, like September to October or November. So there's a pretty good chance that Insta360 is going to release a camera around that time. Let's say Insta360 does release a new 360 camera. What features is it probably going to have? Well, every year the resolution's been doubling. It started out as 3K and then 4K and then 6K. So are we going to see 8K? Well, here's the thing. To get 8K from two sensors, you need two 6K sensors. And the only 6K sensors right now are like micro four thirds or larger. So if we're talking about a 1/2.3 inch sensor, kind of like the current Insta360 ONE X, then it's not likely that we're going to see an 8K 360 camera just because there aren't any 6K 1/2.3 inch sensors. Is it possible that Insta360 could use a 6K micro four thirds sensor, two of them? That's possible, but the price is not going to be the same as you'll see for the Insta360 ONE X. It's going to be much higher. It's almost as if it's a different class of camera altogether. If they use four 4K sensors, then they can get 8K. But it's again a different camera or a different class of camera from the Insta360 ONE X. So if it's not going to be a higher resolution, then what can we expect? Well, we may still see higher image quality. How? Several ways. One is the processor. So if it has a faster or more powerful processor, it's possible, for example, that the next version of the ONE X could use either a higher bit rate or even shoot at H.265 format. And then using the same bit rate, it will have much higher image quality. Another way for the next ONE X to have better image quality is through the storage. See, the ONE X right now uses only one micro SD card, and that's kind of like a bottleneck because even if you have a processor that's capable of a higher bit rate, it doesn't have enough speed to write to that micro SD card. So there's several ways to clear that bottleneck. One is to use two micro SD cards, just like the GoPro Fusion. Besides better image quality, the next version of the ONE X may have a better workflow. The ONE X, as you know, already has a great workflow, but it's possible that the next ONE X may have real-time stitching with stabilization. And another possible feature is video editing within the app. See, this is a feature that they've hinted at for the Insta360 ONE X, but it hasn't been released, and it's possible that they're holding it for the next version of the ONE X instead. What do you think? Are they worth waiting for? Let me know in the comments. So now let's wrap up. Yes, the GoPro Fusion is a little bit cheaper than the ONE X as of July 2019. But here's the thing. I own more than 60 360 cameras. And one thing I've noticed is that the cameras I use most often are not necessarily the ones with the highest image quality. Instead, I find myself turning to cameras that have much easier workflow. The ONE X has a much easier workflow, and yes, I use it way more often than the Fusion. So should you pay more for a 360 camera that you're going to use way more often? That question answers itself. The ONE X and the Fusion are great overall 360 cameras, but if your focus is on photos, then there's a 360 camera that you ought to look at. It's a 200 megapixel X phase, and that's what I'm going to review next. Don't miss it, hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. And I'll see you in 360.